If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The wind carried a dry, low whistle through the Arizona plains that evening, brushing across dead grass and the wooden walls of a cabin that had stood longer than anyone in town could remember. The air was still hot from the day, but the sun was sinking fast, cutting sharp lines of gold across the horizon. A single horse shifted restlessly in the corral. The creak of the old windmill was the only sound that broke the silence. Eli Ward sat on the porch, elbows on his knees, an old Winchester resting across his lap. His beard had gone gray around the edges, his hair longer than he ever used to let it get when he still wore the blue of the U.S. Cavalry. Now it was untrimmed, like everything else about him. His face had the kind of calm that wasn't peace, just the kind that came from running out of things to say. He lived there alone, a few miles from the ghost town of Black Mesa, fixing fences for ranchers when he needed money, hunting when he didn't. People rarely came near his cabin. That's how he liked it. Less talking, less remembering. He'd build a life on silence, because silence didn't ask for forgiveness. When the dark shape appeared on the horizon, Eli didn't move at first. A rider, coming from the west. No wagon, no dust trail big enough for a group, just one horse, steady and slow. He waited, listening. The wind had dropped completely. Even the windmill had gone still. Something about that quiet made his shoulders tighten. Riders didn't come that way unless they were lost or looking for someone. He set the rifle aside, not far, just enough to look unthreatening. His hand stayed close, though. The habit never left. As the rider drew closer, he saw it was a woman. The outline was clear now, a slender figure sitting tall in the saddle, a scarf tied around her neck, a rifle strapped across her back. The horse looked worn, covered in dust from miles of hard riding. She didn't slow much until she was within speaking distance. She stopped a few yards away. For a long time, neither spoke. Her voice broke the quiet first, calm, low, and measured. "You don't remember me." Eli rose from the porch, stepped slowly, squinting in the orange light. Her face was half in shadow, half in sun. There was something familiar about her eyes, dark, steady, not afraid. But he didn't recognize her. "Should I?" he asked, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. The woman reached up, pulled the scarf from her face, and let it fall against her neck. Her skin was marked by the sun, her expression tired but deliberate. "You saved me once," she said. 20 years ago, near the San Pedro River." Eli's throat tightened before his mind even caught up. The San Pedro, the raid. He remembered fire, gunshots, and children screaming. A girl hiding under a broken wagon, too scared to move. He remembered picking her up and running through smoke until his lungs burned. He remembered setting her down near the river, wrapping her in his coat, and telling her to run. He never saw her again after that. Until now. He swallowed hard, his voice low. "You were that kid." She nodded once. "My name is Naomi." Her tone wasn't angry, just firm. "I came to find you." Eli didn't know what to do with that. His instinct told him to step back, but his conscience told him to stay. The memories he'd tried to bury under years of isolation came rushing back, rough and vivid. He could still see the smoke rising, the burned village, the faces of men he used to ride with. Men who had followed orders, same as he did. He motioned toward the well beside the barn. "You can water your horse there," he said quietly. "The ground's soft on that side." She dismounted without a word and led the horse away. Eli watched her walk, steady, deliberate, not the kind of person who feared much anymore. He noticed the worn saddle, the patched stirrup strap, the rifle that had been cleaned often but used rarely. She wasn't a wanderer by choice. She'd come a long way for something that mattered. Inside, Eli's chest felt tight. He sat back down on the porch, staring at the ground for a long while. He told himself it didn't mean anything. People came and went, but this wasn't anyone. This was the girl from the river, the one good thing he ever did in that uniform, the one thing that hadn't turned to ash in his memory. As dusk deepened, Naomi returned from the well. Her horse drank quietly behind her. She stood near the porch, her expression calm. "I didn't come to settle a debt," she said. "I came because I needed to see if you were real." Eli looked up at her. "I'm real enough," he said. though I'm not sure if that's a good thing. Naomi nodded slightly. I'll camp by the barn. I don't plan to stay long. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, there's drywood near the fence. Nights get cold. As she walked away into the half-dark, Eli leaned back in his chair. His hand was still shaking a little. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something heavier, like realizing the past had finally caught up to him, and it had a face that remembered. For the first time in years, Eli didn't sleep easy that night. The wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks of the old cabin. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the girl by the river and the woman by his barn. Somewhere outside, Naomi's small campfire flickered against the dark. He could see the faint glow through the window. The sight brought him no comfort, but it reminded him that for the first time in decades, he wasn't completely alone. The morning came slow and colorless, the kind that carried more silence than sound. Eli woke before sunrise, as he always did. He sat on the edge of his cot, boots on the floorboards, head heavy from a night of broken sleep. The memory of the woman outside, Naomi, stayed sharp in his mind. He didn't know if she was still there or if she'd left before dawn, the way travelers usually did in these parts. But part of him hoped she hadn't. That thought surprised him more than he wanted to admit. When he stepped outside, the air was cool and dry. A thin fog hung low over the ground. He saw her near the barn, crouched by the fire pit, stirring the last coals from the night before. She'd already taken off her coat and tied her hair back, working as if she'd lived there all along. Her horse stood tethered nearby, fed and brushed. Coffee's inside, Eli said quietly, his voice rough from sleep. She looked up briefly, then nodded. Already had some. Hope you don't mind. I found your pot. Eli gave a small shrug. If you found coffee, you're welcome to it. They didn't speak again for several minutes. He busied himself with the well, drawing water into a bucket, while she began picking up stray boards near the fence line. It wasn't conversation that connected them, it was rhythm. Work had its own kind of language. By mid-morning, Eli finally broke the quiet. You said you came to find me. Why now? After 20 years. Naomi straightened, wiped her hands on her trousers, and looked at him across the fence. Her eyes were steady, the kind that didn't waver easily. Because the world got smaller, she said. There's nowhere left to go that isn't taken by someone else. My people scattered. Some went north, some east. I found a few. We want to start again, somewhere no one will chase us off. Eli listened without interrupting. There was no pity in his face, only understanding, the kind that came from living too long with regret. She added, I remembered your name. I heard it once from a trader years ago. Said there was a man by this river who lived alone, never spoke to anyone. I knew it had to be you. He set the bucket down beside the post and rested his arm on it. And when you found me, he asked, what did you expect to find? I didn't know, she said simply. Maybe a man I could trust again. Maybe someone who'd remember why he helped me. Eli's jaw tightened. I remember. She nodded. Then you know what it cost. The words landed like a stone between them. Eli looked away, past her, toward the hills. He didn't answer because there was nothing to say. He had been a soldier following orders. Orders that left towns burning and families dead. Saving her had been the one thing that hadn't felt like sin. They worked in silence after that, each caught in their own thoughts. Eli tried not to think about the raid, but the images were too sharp. He remembered the faces of his commanding officers, the smell of smoke, the sound of crying. He'd buried all that under years of quiet, but Naomi's presence had pulled it up again. By noon, she sat near the porch, patching a tear in her saddlebag. Eli brought her a tin plate of bread and beans. She accepted it with a small nod. You live out here alone? She asked between bites. Long enough to forget what the town looks like. Why? Eli paused, unsure how to answer. Because I'm better company than most folks, he said finally. It wasn't a joke, but Naomi gave a faint smile anyway. You left the army, she said. I left what was left of it, he replied. Didn't want to take orders from men who'd lost their souls. Her expression softened slightly. And now I fix fences and mind my own. Naomi studied him for a moment, the way someone studies the sky before rain. You don't talk much, she said. Talking doesn't fix anything. Neither does silence. Eli looked at her then, And for a brief moment, he felt something stir, a quiet sense that she was right. The silence had been his shield, but it had also been his prison. The rest of the day passed under a flat sky. Naomi helped gather fallen branches near the creek. She moved with purpose, like someone used to surviving on her own. Eli noticed the old scars on her forearms and the small turquoise pendant she wore, hanging on a thin leather cord. It caught the light every time she bent down. He wanted to ask where she got it, but didn't. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, she sat by the fire while he cleaned his rifle nearby. The firelight flickered against her face, strong features, calm eyes, a kind of quiet that came from living through too much. "Where will you go when you leave here?" Eli asked. She looked into the flames. "North, maybe. There's land up by the canyon. I want to build a home there, if it's safe. I can't live with memories forever." He nodded slowly. "You'll need help. The land's rough. Hard to build alone." "I know." Eli hesitated, then said, "I could ride up there with you. Help get it started." She turned to him, surprised. "Why would you do that?" He looked down at his hands, the worn skin, the scars on his knuckles. "Because it's something that needs doing," he said. "And because I owe you that much." Naomi didn't respond right away. Her expression softened just enough to show that she understood. "Then we'll leave when the sun's low," she said. "Tomorrow." They sat together until the fire burned down. Eli watched the sky turn dark and the stars appear one by one. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he didn't dread it. Inside his chest, the guilt that had kept him company for half his life eased a little. Naomi's presence wasn't comfort exactly, but it was something steadier, something that made him believe that maybe redemption didn't come from forgetting. Maybe it came from showing up again when it mattered. When the fire went out, neither of them said goodnight. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was shared. The next morning started with the sound of the wind pressing gently against the cabin walls. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, faint and silver. Eli woke to the smell of smoke. Naomi had already started the fire outside, boiling water in the old tin pot that had seen more years than both of them put together. She moved quietly, focused, as though every small motion mattered. Eli stepped out, tightening his belt, his rifle slung over one shoulder. They didn't speak at first. There was something unspoken about early mornings, like the world hadn't yet decided whether to be kind or cruel. Eli poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. Their eyes met briefly. It was a simple exchange, but in that silence, something steady had started to build. Trust. "We'll follow the ridge west," Naomi said after a moment, looking at the map she had drawn on a torn scrap of paper. Her handwriting was rough but clear. "It leads down into a dry valley. I found it last year. No one goes there. The soil's good enough for planting if we can bring water to it." Eli studied the sketch. "You rode there alone?" "I've ridden alone most of my life," she said plainly. "You learn not to expect company." He gave a small nod. That kind of solitude was something he understood too well. They packed before the sun climbed too high. Naomi secured her horse's saddle with firm, practiced hands, every motion deliberate. Eli loaded his pack with tools: rope, hammer, nails, and a small shovel. He had no clear plan, just the feeling that helping her rebuild something might rebuild a part of himself. They left the cabin behind, the desert spreading open before them. The trail was long, stretching through dry grass and low brush. Coyotes moved in the distance, keeping their distance. Hours passed with only the sound of hooves and wind. Naomi rode ahead, her back straight, the turquoise pendant on her chest catching the sun. Eli followed, watching her movements, noticing how she scanned the horizon every few minutes. She wasn't just cautious, she was used to danger. When they stopped to rest near a small stream, Eli finally asked what had been pressing on his mind since she arrived. "That night by the river," he said. "What happened after? I remember wrapping you in my coat. Then you were gone." Naomi took a sip of water before answering. "I walked until morning. Found a trader's camp 2 miles north. They took me to Tucson. I stayed with a family there for a few years, white settlers. They gave me work, treated me well enough, but I was never one of them." Her voice was even, but her hands fidgeted with the edge of her canteen. When I was old enough, I left. Spent years moving between camps and towns. Always somewhere between worlds. Not Apache enough for one, not civilized enough for the other. Eli listened closely, his jaw set. He could feel the weight behind her words. The long years of surviving by being neither seen nor trusted. And now you're trying to build a place of your own, he said. Yes, she replied. A place where no one needs to choose. He nodded slowly. That's worth building. They rode again as the sun began to lower. The air shimmered with heat, the sky washed in a pale blue haze. Eli's horse stumbled once on a loose rock, and Naomi turned quickly, concern flickering across her face. You all right? He gave a brief nod, brushing dust from his coat. Horse is older than I am. Doesn't mean he's done yet. Naomi smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It was small, almost unsure, but it stayed long enough to change the air between them. By late afternoon, they reached the valley she had spoken of. The land opened wide, a long stretch of dry grass bordered by small hills. A creek bed cut through the center, empty but deep enough to hold water after rain. The place looked forgotten, untouched. For Naomi, that made it perfect. She dismounted slowly, her boots pressing into the dust. She stood there for a long time, just looking at it, as if testing whether it would let her stay. This is it, she said finally. This is where I want to build. Eli climbed down, walking beside her. He looked around carefully, measured the space, felt the dirt in his hand, saw how the light fell across the ground. It's good land, he said. Dry but not dead. If we dig deep enough, we'll find water. Naomi turned toward him, studying his face. You sound like a man who's done this before. Built a few things in my time, he said. None of them lasted. Maybe this one will. They unpacked their gear and made a small camp near the old creek. As night settled, they built a fire and cooked beans and jerky. The air cooled fast, the stars cutting through the dark sky one by one. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like he was passing time. He felt like he was using it. When Naomi spoke again, her tone was quiet. Do you ever think about leaving this country? Starting somewhere far from what you've done? Eli stared into the fire. Used to, he said. But leaving doesn't change what's behind you. Just changes what side of it you sleep on. She nodded, her expression unreadable. You still wear the guilt. It doesn't wash off easy, he admitted. But helping you, maybe it's something close to right. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the air. Naomi didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was low, steady. You saved a child once. Now you're helping her build a home. Maybe that's enough. Eli looked up at her, the glow of the flames soft on her face. There was no bitterness in her eyes, just understanding. That was harder to face than anger. He wanted to say something, something that would explain the years of silence, the weight he carried, but no words came. Instead, he nodded once, a gesture that said more than speech. The night deepened. Coyotes cried far off in the hills. Naomi lay down near the fire, the turquoise pendant still glinting faintly in the light. Eli stayed awake longer, staring at the sky. The stars were sharp and countless. He thought about how strange it was that after 2 decades of avoiding people, it took one woman to make the world feel less empty again. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, whether the land could sustain them, whether the past would leave them in peace. But for the first time, he had something close to purpose. When the wind shifted, carrying the smell of earth and smoke, Eli felt the smallest flicker of something unfamiliar and fragile inside him. Hope, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that lives in the act of staying. And when he finally lay down near the dying fire, he knew he would wake up the next morning ready to work, not for survival, but for something that might finally matter. The following days passed in slow, honest rhythm. Morning light came pale over the hills, spilling across the half-built camp where Eli and Naomi worked from dawn until their hands ached. They built the frame of a small shelter first, rough logs for walls, clay packed tight into the gaps. It wasn't much, but it held against the wind. Naomi was tireless, her movements steady and certain. She knew how to tie beams, how to cut clean notches in wood, how to balance a roof pole without help. It surprised Eli, though he didn't say so. Each evening, when they rested, she sat by the fire and sharpened tools or carved small pieces of wood into shapes. Birds, horses, faces he didn't recognize. She said little about them, but Eli could tell each one meant something. Once, he asked quietly, "You learned that somewhere?" She nodded. "My father taught me. He said carving made your hands remember what your heart forgot." Eli didn't answer, but he understood. He had his own way of remembering, his silence, his careful work, the way he never left a job half done. Over time, the small camp began to look like a home. Naomi dug a channel from the dry creek bed to catch rain when it came. Eli built a pen for the horses and fixed the wagon they had brought supplies in. The work filled the air between them, leaving little room for the ghosts of the past. Yet those ghosts still lingered, waiting. One night, as the fire burned low, Naomi spoke without looking up. "I used to think you were a bad man," she said. Her tone was calm, not cruel. "The soldiers who came to my village, some of them laughed while they burned our homes. I remembered your face, but I wasn't sure if you were one of them." Eli sat still for a long moment, the flames flickering against the lines on his face. "I was there," he said quietly. "I followed orders. I told myself it wasn't my choice. But I carried you out because I knew it was wrong. That doesn't make it right. It just means I did one thing worth remembering." Naomi looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "It's strange," she said softly. "I hated soldiers for years, but you're the only one I remember clearly. Maybe because you're the only one who looked afraid." Eli's eyes lowered. "I was afraid. Not of dying, of living with what we'd done." Her gaze softened, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was understanding. The next morning, the sky turned gray. The air felt thick, restless. Eli knew a storm was coming before the clouds even broke the ridge. They worked fast, tying down the supplies and covering the tools. The wind rose by midday, carrying sand and dust across the valley in swirling sheets. When a rain finally came, it came hard. The small shelter shook under the weight of it, the roof dripping in steady lines. They sat inside, water dripping near the doorway, the sound of thunder rolling in waves. Naomi watched the firelight flicker against the wet floor. "We'll need stronger walls," she said. Eli nodded. "We'll build them. Brick this time, not wood." She gave a faint smile. "You don't stop once you start, do you?" He met her gaze. Stopping never fixed anything. The rain lasted most of the night. They sat close to the fire, their shadows crossing on the walls. The storm outside made the small space feel smaller, but neither of them seemed to mind. In that close quiet, Naomi asked the question that had been waiting since the first night. "Why did you stay in this land after the war? Why didn't you go somewhere new, start over?" Eli leaned back against the wall, his voice low. "Because running doesn't change what's behind you. I stayed because leaving felt like hiding. I figured if I kept living here, maybe the land would forgive me before I did." Naomi nodded slowly, the firelight catching the turquoise at her neck. "The land doesn't forgive," she said, "but it remembers who tries." When a storm finally broke before dawn, they stepped outside to find the creek alive again. Water ran in slow, muddy streams through the valley, filling the trench Naomi had dug days earlier. She smiled faintly, the first real lightness he'd seen in her face. "It worked," she said. Eli stood beside her, watching the water flow. "You made it work." The next days brought clear skies and hard work. They rebuilt the walls stronger, lined the trench with stone, and planted seeds along the damp soil. Naomi moved with quiet confidence, her mind already planning the next step. Eli noticed how she spoke of the future now, when the crops grow, when the others come. It was the first time he'd heard her talk like someone who believed she might stay. But their small piece didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as Eli chopped wood near the hill, he saw dust rising in the distance, a rider approaching fast. He set down the axe and waited. Naomi came out from the garden, her hand resting lightly on the rifle by the door. When the rider drew close, Eli recognized the uniform before the face. A worn coat with a silver badge, Marshal Kavanaugh, a man he hadn't seen in 10 years. The marshal reined in his horse a few yards away, his face drawn and sunburned. "Didn't expect to find you out here, Ward," he said, voice steady but cold. His eyes flicked to Naomi. "And with company, no less." Eli didn't move. "What do you want, Kavanaugh?" "Just checking on old friends. Word in town says you've been keeping an Apache woman out here. Folks don't take kindly to that." Naomi's posture didn't change, but her grip tightened on the rifle. Eli stepped forward, his voice hard. "She's not a rumor. She's my partner in this land. And you can tell the town that what happens here is none of their business." Kavanaugh smirked, always with a stubborn kind. "You could have come back, you know, worn the badge again. Instead, you're out here playing farmer." "I've done enough wearing," Eli said. The marshal's eyes narrowed. "You think the past forgets you because you hide behind a woman? The army might have left this land, but men still remember what you did and what she is." Before Eli could speak, Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was clear, sharp as stone. "You could tell them whatever you want. I'm not hiding. Not from you. Not from anyone." Kavanaugh studied her a moment longer, then turned his horse. "You're making a mistake, Ward. Sooner or later, someone will come looking." As he rode away, the dust trailed behind him like smoke. Naomi watched him go, her jaw set but her eyes distant. Eli stood beside her, saying nothing until the sound of hooves disappeared. "He won't be back soon," Eli said, "but he'll talk." She nodded. "Let him. I've lived through worse than talk." That night, neither of them slept much. The marshal's visit had stirred old fears of soldiers, of loss, of the fragile peace they had built being torn apart. Yet when dawn came, they didn't pack or hide. They went back to work. Naomi fetched water. Eli repaired the fence. The sun rose bright over the valley, casting long shadows over the house they'd built together. Their work wasn't done, but it was real. The land was changing. So were they. And though both knew the past had begun to stir again, neither spoke of leaving. Because after all the years of running, they had finally found something worth staying for. The following weeks settled into a tense calm. The land around the new home had begun to change, small patches of green pushing through the dry earth. The creek still held water from the last rain, and Naomi's planted rows had started to take shape. Each morning, she walked the field barefoot, checking the soil, her shadow long across the ground. Eli usually watched from the porch, cleaning tools or mending harness straps, pretending not to notice how the sun caught the turquoise stone in her neck. But the peace never felt complete. The visit from Marshal Kavanaugh hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Eli could tell Naomi sensed it too. She slept lighter now, woke at the smallest sound. Sometimes she stood outside after dark, scanning the horizon, the rifle close at hand. Eli didn't tell her that he'd heard riders passing in the night 2 days ago. 2, maybe 3, too far to make out faces, but close enough to make the horses restless. He didn't want to frighten her. By the 5th morning, Naomi said it herself. "They'll come," she said quietly while sharpening a knife. "Maybe not him, maybe others. But word spreads." Eli nodded. "I know. Will you leave if they do?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Not this time." That was all that needed saying. That evening, the sun set blood orange across the horizon. Eli worked until dusk, fixing a new latch on the corral gate, while Naomi cooked by the fire, corn mash and beans, simple but warm. The smell mixed with the dry scent of mesquite. For a brief while, the world felt normal. They ate quietly, their conversation short but comfortable. When darkness fell, they sat by the fire, the quiet settling deep around them. Naomi broke it first. "You've never told me what happened after the war ended," she said. "After the raid." Eli's gaze stayed on the fire. The question wasn't cruel, just curious. Still, it pulled at a place inside him he usually kept closed. "There wasn't much after," he said slowly. "The army disbanded my unit. The ones who survived scattered. I stayed on a ranch for a few years, worked horses, fixed fences. But I couldn't look anyone in the eye without seeing ghosts. So I left, found that cabin near Black Mesa, and stopped moving. I figured if I kept to myself long enough, maybe I'd stop being one of them." Naomi nodded slightly, her expression calm but sad. "And did you?" He shook his head. "No, you don't stop being what you were. You just try to do something better after." The fire cracked between them, the sound sharp in the quiet. She studied him for a moment, then said softly, "You're doing that now." He looked up at her then, and for a brief second, something in his chest eased. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. That night, the sound of hoofbeats woke them both. Distant at first, then closer. Eli was on his feet before the second echo. Naomi grabbed the rifle, stepping into the doorway. The fire outside had burned low, throwing long shadows across the field. 3 riders were coming down the ridge, torches in hand. "Stay inside," Eli said. Naomi's voice was calm. "You'll need another gun." Eli hesitated, then nodded once. "Stay low." The riders stopped a few yards from the house. One shouted, "Ward, we heard you've gone soft. Taking in savages now." The voice was slurred, drunk with hate. Eli recognized it. A ranch hand from town named Porter. Trouble seeker. The other 2 men were strangers. Eli stepped forward into the firelight, his revolver drawn but lowered. "Go home," he said evenly. "There's nothing for you here." Porter spat in the dirt. "The town says you're building a camp for her kind." "That true? I'm building a home," Eli said. "That's all. Not for her," one of the others yelled. "This is white man's land." Naomi stood beside him now, rifle raised. "It's the land of whoever keeps it alive," she said. Porter's hand twitched toward his holster. Eli's voice cut through the tension, sharp and cold. "Don't." The next few seconds stretched thin. The fire popped. The horses snorted. Then one of the men moved too fast. A shot rang out, echoing through the valley. Naomi fired back once, clean and controlled. The man fell from his horse. The others panicked, pulling their reins hard. Porter's face twisted with fear and confusion. Eli stepped closer, his voice firm but steady. "You ride back and tell them this land's not theirs anymore. You come again, you won't ride home." Porter hesitated, then turned his horse and fled. The last man followed. The night swallowed them both. Naomi lowered her rifle slowly, breathing hard. Eli walked to the fallen rider, checked his pulse, then stood. "Dead," he said quietly. There was no triumph in his tone, just fact. "We'll bury him come sunrise." They worked in silence, digging a shallow grave on the edge of the property. Naomi wiped her hands on her pants, her face unreadable. "They won't stop," she said. Eli looked at her, his voice calm. "Then neither will we." Days passed. No one came back. The story probably reached town, but no posse formed. Maybe folks had realized some things weren't worth the fight anymore. The valley stayed quiet. The crops grew. The creek ran clear after another rain. Life, fragile as it was, went on. By midsummer, the small home stood complete, a single-room cabin with a porch, a roof that didn't leak, and a fence garden that stretched down to the creek. Naomi carved small wooden totems along the porch beam. "Symbols of protection," she said. Eli never asked their meaning, but he respected them. One morning, she came to him holding a letter. "I sent word north," she said. "To the others. My brother, some families who survived. They're coming. Maybe 10 people." Eli nodded. "They'll have a place here." She smiled faintly. "You don't mind sharing?" "I've had enough years of being alone," he said. When a new families arrived weeks later, dusty, tired, cautious, Naomi greeted them with quiet authority. They set up tents near the creek, began to build. Eli helped without needing to be asked. He fixed tools, hauled wood, and taught them how to reinforce the walls for the storms that would come. Slowly, the valley came alive with voices, laughter, and the sound of hammers. One evening, Naomi found Eli sitting on the porch, carving something small from a block of wood. "What are you making?" she asked. He held it up. A small horse, simple but carefully shaped. "For you," he said, "to replace the one I gave you by the river." Thought it was time for a new one. Naomi took it in her hand, her eyes shining softly in the fading light. "You kept that memory all these years?" He nodded. "It was the only one that ever felt right." She looked at him for a long time, then said, "You saved me twice, Eli Ward. Once from the fire, once from the ghost that came after." He looked away, a faint smile on his face. "Maybe you were the one who saved me. You just let me think it was the other way around." The sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in pale gold. Children's laughter echoed near the creek. The air smelled of wood smoke and growing things. For the first time in decades, Eli felt still, not hollow, not haunted, just still. He looked over at Naomi, standing on the porch beside him, her hair loose in the evening breeze, her expression calm. There was no need for words. The past had done enough talking. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the valley that now held life again. A place that had been empty for too long now belonged to someone. To them. The land didn't forget, but it had forgiven in its own quiet way. And as the stars began to rise, Eli Ward finally understood that peace wasn't something you found far from your past. It was something you built with your own hands, one day at a time, beside the people who chose to stay. It was at last home,